The Harper's Ferry Farmers Market thrummed under an October mountain sky, its crisp air laced with the clatter of apple crates and the buttery scent of fresh-baked cornbread. A fiddle's twang wove through the chatter of locals haggling over jars of sorghum syrup and bundles of collards, while sunlight dappled the cobblestone paths between quilt-draped stalls. Lila Hayes, 29, steadied a hand-carved cedar table at her family's carpentry booth, her hands scarred from chisels, her precise movements betraying a quiet pride. The table's grain gleamed, each curve a story of late-night sanding and Cedar's stubborn heart. Corey, her 16-year-old apprentice, taught a toolbox, his observant eyes scanning the crowd. "This one's your best yet, Miss Lila," he said, setting down a mallet with care. Lila's lips twitched upward, a rare softness in her guarded gaze. "Let's see if it finds a home," she replied, her voice low, threaded with hope. The Hayes family stall stood at the market's heart, its awning sagging under the weight of hand-hewn signs and baskets of whittled spoons. Lila adjusted her tables, expecting a nod from her mother, Diane, or a shared glance over their shared craft. Instead, Vance, her 32-year-old stepbrother, dominated the booth, his suave grin catching the light as he pitched mass-produced rustic chic to a suited corporate chain rep. His hands gestured wildly, promising factory lines churning out Hayes originals for urban lofts. Lila's mother, Diane, stood beside him, her face alight with admiration. "Lila," she said, offering a table, her voice steady but edged with expectation. Diane's eyes flicked up, her smile tight, before turning back to Vance's spiel. Roy, Lila's stepfather, adjusted Vance's tie with a proud pat. Ignoring Lila's quiet "morning, Roy." The dismissal stung, sharp as a splinter under skin. Corey's voice cut through, soft but pointed. "Those are your tables he's selling." Lila's gaze drifted to the stall, tables crowded with relatives swapping tales, aunts slicing cornbread, cousins tossing apple cores. Her chest tightened, no space for her or Corey. Roy's whisper carried, low but clear, "Lila's too stubborn to scale up." Lila froze, her fingers brushing the table's edge, its grain grounding her as Corey's jaw tightened. Diane clapped Vance's shoulder, praising his big-picture thinking to the chain rep, oblivious to Lila's presence. Lila set a small cedar coaster on the booth's corner, its hand-etched leaf unnoticed amid Vance's glossy flyers. "Let's check the other stalls," she told Corey, her voice even despite the ache, leading him to a bench by a cider press. Its air tart with crushed apples. A memory surged, rough as unsanded wood. Lila, 20, rebuilding the family stall's frame after Vance's botched delivery deal left clients unpaid and lumber rotting. She'd worked nights, her savings drained on nails and tarps, while Vance spun excuses at family suppers. Diane and Roy had toasted his ambitious spirit, their eyes gliding past Lila's blistered hands. "I've been their foundation," Lila thought, her voiceover heavy with weariness. "Carving, mending, holding it up. But today, I'm just a knot they'd rather plane away." Corey opened his toolbox, sketching a chair leg, but his gaze lingered on the family stall. "Why don't they see you?" he asked, his voice quiet. Lila smoothed his sleeve, her callous fingers steady despite the pang inside. "Some folks only notice what's polished and loud," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Diane's voice rose, cutting through the market's hum. "Big news," she called, raising a cider mug. "We're selling Lila's table designs to Mountain Home Outfitters through Vance's deal. It's family profit." The crowd clapped, vendors nodding, Vance beaming like a salesman closing a deal. Lila's breath hitched, her hands gripping the bench's splintered edge. Those designs, her tables, born from years of sketching, cedar scent, and her own tools, were hers, crafted in her workshop's quiet hours. Corey whispered, "That's your work." Lila's jaw set, her hope curdling into resolve. Diane's eyes met hers briefly, unapologetic, before turning to Vance's next pitch. Roy's smile didn't waver, his fussing unbroken. Lila lingered, the market's warmth fading. The coaster's leaf a silent defiance. She'd come for connection, for Corey, for her craft's legacy. But now she saw the truth. Her family wasn't her grain. She'd need to carve her own. The Harper's Ferry workshop smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, its rafters glowing under a November drizzle that tapped the tin roof. Lila Hayes, 29, knelt beside a workbench, her hands scarred from chisels guiding Corey, her 16-year-old apprentice, through a dovetail joint. The oak plank yielded under Corey's careful cuts, his observant eyes fixed on the chisel's angle. "Keep the pressure even," Lila said, her voice steady, her precise focus on his hands. The workshop, once a haven of hand-hewn beams, was now cluttered with Mountain Home Outfitters assembly kits, flat-packed shelves and plastic-wrapped bolts that mocked her craft. Corey's toolbox rested on a bench strewn with corporate chain logos. "These joints are solid, Ms. Lila," Corey said, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. Lila's lips curved faintly, but her phone pinged in her apron pocket. An email from her mother, Diane. "Vance's deal needs you. Step up, Lila." Another followed. "Don't let us down." Lila's grip tightened on a mallet, her eyes on Corey's joint. "Nice angle," she said, deleting the email without a glance. "You're shaping the wood's truth." Vance has always been the showman, Lila thought, her voiceover rough with memory. Big promises, no foundation. "I've rebuilt his messes, but this time, I'm carving my own line." Her mind drifted to 6 years ago, when she was 23, repairing broken lathes after Vance's failed online shop left the workshop in debt. He called it a digital pivot, while Lila bartered her furniture to cover tool costs. Her stepfather, Roy, and Diane had praised Vance's hustle at family barbecues, their nods skimming past Lila's calloused palms. The memory echoed the farmer's market last month, where Lila and Corey sat on a cider press bench, her cedar table overlooked as Diane handed Vance her designs for a corporate sale. Her greeting as ignored as the coaster's etched leaf. That evening, Lila walked to a community potluck in a riverside barn, its rafters strung with mason jar lanterns. The air thick with smoked trout and molasses pie. Locals, weavers, potters, orchard keepers, clinked glasses, their faces warm but tense. The family workshop, where kids learned to whittle and elders restored chairs, faced closure. Diane stood by a buffet table, her scarf knotted tightly, her voice low. "Vance leased the workshop to Mountain Home Outfitters," she said, avoiding Lila's gaze. "They're turning it into a warehouse." Roy's hand rested on Diane's shoulder, his eyes pleading. "You're skilled, Lila," Diane added. "Train their workers to copy your designs. Save the workshop." The crowd turned, their hope heavy as wet lumber. Lila's stomach twisted. The weight of their trust familiar yet suffocating. "What lease?" she asked, her voice sharp but controlled. A neighbor slid her a folder, lease documents detailing a $60,000 deal tied to Vance's Hayes Originals pitch. Lila's designs, her cedar tables, sketched in her workshop's quiet hours, were listed as assets without her consent. Her hands trembled as she scanned the papers, the river's murmur outside doing little to cool her rising anger. The lease was a betrayal. Vance had sold her craft to save his ego, and the workshop's unpaid rent sealed its fate. "He used my work," she said, her voice cutting through the barn's hum. Diane's gaze dropped, Roy's fingers fidgeted with his mug. "I'll handle it," Lila said, her tone clipped, buying time to process the theft. Back in her workshop loft, she spread the documents across a workbench, the lamplight harsh. The lease was a corporate takeover, linked to Vance's failing luxury brand. The workshop, her grandmother Ruth's legacy, was at risk, and Lila's designs were the bait. Fury surged, but so did a fierce defiance. Vance hadn't just threatened her craft, he'd stolen her name to do it. The next night, Lila drove to a riverside campfire, held on a gravel bank where the Shenandoah's ripples caught starlight. Logs crackled, casting shadows on relatives tossing corn cobs into the flames. Vance lounged by the fire, his suave blazer swapped for a flannel, his grin unshaken. Diane and Roy sat nearby, stirring embers. Lila didn't pause for pleasantries. She dropped the lease folder beside Vance, its thud sharp against the gravel. "You used my designs without asking," she said, her voice low but searing. "You're killing the workshop." Vance's grin widened, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "You're the workhorse, Lila," he said, shrugging. "Keep up." Diane sighed, staring at the river. Roy muttered, "Don't be ungrateful, Lila. We're family." Lila's fists clenched, the old pattern repeating, her craft erased, Vance's recklessness excused. She thought of Corey, shaping dovetails in the workshop, trusting her to be more than the family's fixer. "This isn't family," she said, her gaze locked on Vance's. "It's theft." She turned to her parents. "And I'm done letting you call it love." Diane's mouth opened, but no words came. Lila walked away, the campfire's glow fading, the river song steadying her pulse. She drove back to the workshop. Corey's joint cut still on the bench, a reminder of what she was fighting for. Vance's deal wasn't just a betrayal. It was a breaking point. Lila would save the workshop for Corey for Harper's Ferry, For herself. The old Harper's Ferry mill loomed under a January night's frost, its brick walls etched with decades of river mist, the Shenandoah's murmur a faint pulse beyond. Inside, an underground craft auction thrummed in secret, its rafters strung with bare bulbs casting shadows over crates of pottery and hand-stitched quilts. Lila Hayes, 29, slipped through a side door. Her hands scarred from chisels clutching a portfolio of workshop logs, her breath sharp with purpose. Corey, her 16-year-old apprentice, followed, his toolbox slung over his shoulder. His observant eyes scanning the crowd of collectors in flannel and leather. Lila's cedar table stood center stage, its grain glowing under a spotlight, flanked by her sketches pinned to a burlap board. "This is it, Ms. Lila," Corey whispered, setting down a projector. Lila nodded, her jaw tight. "Let's show them what's mine," she said. Her voice low but fierce, her heart pounding like a hammer on oak. The auction was Lila's gambit to sabotage Vance's corporate deal with Mountain Home Outfitters, who planned to mass-produce her designs and shutter the family workshop. She'd spent weeks gathering proof, workshop logs time-stamped with her late-night carvings, receipts for her tools, and sketches tracing each table's curve. Buyers milled about, artisans, gallery owners, a few wealthy eccentrics, murmuring over her table's craftsmanship. A grizzled bidder ran a hand along its edge. Nodding. "This is soul work," he said, and Lila's chest flared with quiet pride. As the auctioneer, a wiry woman in a wool cap, called for bids, offers climbed $2,000, $3,500, $5, $000, outpacing the chain's paltry contract. Lila stood by the mill's damp wall, her portfolio grounding her as Corey fiddled with the projector. "They see it," she thought. Her voiceover taut with hope. "My work, not Vance's lie." The mill's iron door clanged open and Vance stormed in, his suave blazer wrinkled, his grin a brittle mask. "Lila," he barked, his voice slicing through the bids. "You're tanking my deal." Heads turned, some collectors frowning, others intrigued by the drama. Vance faced the crowd, hands spread like a preacher. "I'm scaling the Hayes name, factory lines, national stores." Lila's just bitter, hoarding her little hobby. Murmurs rippled, a few bidders glancing at Lila skeptically. Her pulse roared. But she stood firm, her hand steady on her portfolio. "Your deal," she said, her voice cutting like a chisel. "You stole my designs to sell out our workshop." The auctioneer paused, sensing a story. Before Vance could spin another tale, Corey sprang forward, his projector humming to life. Lila's sketches flared across the mill's brick wall, dozens of pencil drawings, each dated, layered with her grandmother Ruth's angular style, her influence clear in every curve. "Ms. Lila made these," Corey said, his voice steady despite his trembling hands. "Not Vance. Check the dates." The crowd leaned in, phones snapping photos as Corey scrolled to a sketch from age 15, Ruth's handwriting in the margin, Lila's gift. Buyers nodded, their bids resuming $6,000, $7, $500, drowning Vance's protests. A gallery owner shouted, "This is original art, not chain store junk." Vance's grin cracked, his eyes darting to the door. Lila clicked to her final proof. An email from Mountain Home Outfitters retracting their offer after her lawyer. A pro bono contact from a craft guild verified her sole ownership. The mill buzzed. But the victory was raw, the workshop's unpaid lease loomed, demanding new funds. As the auction ended, Lila's phone lit with texts from Diane and Roy, "You're selfish. You broke us." The words cut deeper than splintered wood, but Lila didn't flinch. She stayed, accepting a bidder's handshake, their callous grip a contrast to her family's cold blame. "I didn't shatter them," she thought, her voiceover soft but resolute. "I just stopped carrying their weight." Later, in the workshop's quiet storeroom, Lila sorted through old crates, her hands brushing a lathe. A battered tool chest, shoved behind a pile of scrap pine, caught her eye. She pried it open, her breath catching at a worn carving knife, its handle smooth from use, Ruth's initials etched into the blade. Below them, fainter but clear, "Shape your own worth, Lila." Her fingers closed around it, tears pricking as the knife's weight anchored her. Ruth had seen her. Her dawn planing, her patient cuts, her love for wood when her family turned away. Vance's theft had driven her to this edge, but Ruth's legacy gave her the strength to stand. The knife's etching wove a path Lila could still follow. Not for her family, but for Harper's Ferry. Corey's courage, the buyer's nods, the storeroom's sawdust scent. They were her grain now. Lila rose, the knife in her hand, her defiance a steady carve. Her family's scorn and Vance's fall were heavy, but she wouldn't bear their burden anymore. She'd fight for the workshop, for Corey, for the worth Ruth had carved into her all along. May's mountain light spilled through the Harper's Ferry workshop's windows, now reborn as a cooperative maker's space, its oak beams humming with the whir of saws and the scent of fresh planed pine. Lila Hayes, 29, stood by a workbench, her hands scarred from chisels sorting donated chisels, her hazel eyes warm as she watched Corey, her 16-year-old apprentice, adjust a lathe for a group of artisans. Corey's toolbox, open to a sketch of a stool, rested on a bench dusted with sawdust. "This place is breathing, Ms. Lila," Corey said, his voice bright. Lila's heart lifted, her gaze tracing the space's pulse, workbenches lined with carving tools, weavers threading looms in a corner. Ruth knew families carved, not given, she thought, her voiceover soft and steady. "And I'm shaping mine here." The maker's space was Lila's answer to the workshop's near loss to Mountain Home Outfitters. A legacy built with craft rather than Vance's corporate schemes. Harper's Ferry had rallied, potters donated clamps, carpenters hauled lumber, and kids painted signs for woodworking classes. Miss Clara, a local weaver with a quick laugh and silver-streaked braids, set up a loom, teasing Corey about his lathe's wobble. But amid the growth, a letter arrived from Roy. Its envelope creased with river damp. "Come to the family reunion. Let's patch things up." Lila's chest tightened. A flicker of longing stirring despite Vance's theft and her parents' selfish accusations at the auction. Maybe they'd see her now. With Corey's quiet nod, she went. The Hayes family reunion sprawled across a hillside clearing, the air thick with fried catfish and the twang of a banjo. Vance lounged at a trestle table, his suave blazer swapped for a plaid shirt. His charm frayed but persistent. Diane and Roy hovered near him, their smiles strained. "Lila," Roy began, his voice hesitant, "we want to move forward." Before Lila could respond, Vance leaned in. His grin sharp. "Your maker's space is nice, Lila. I paved the way, you know, showed you how to think big." Lila's breath caught, disgust rising like sawdust in her throat. He hadn't paved her path, he'd stolen her designs, risked her workshop, and stood by as Diane dismissed her. Diane nodded as if Vance's lie held weight. "We're all proud," she said. Blind to the betrayal. Lila pushed back her chair, its scrape harsh against the dirt. "You didn't show me anything," she said, her voice low but firm. "You took my work. And I'm done calling it family." Roy's eyes widened, Diane's hands clutched her shawl, but no one spoke. Lila walked away, the clearing's breeze cooling her face, the scent of pine and river grounding her. She returned to the maker's space, where Corey and Miss Clara were sanding a table under lantern light. "How was it?" Corey asked, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. Lila shook her head, her smile steady. "Not my grain anymore." "You are." In the workshop's tool room, Lila hung Ruth's carving knife on a pegboard wall. Its etched words, "Shape your own worth. Lila, a quiet anchor." Miss Clara steadied the hook, her knot a solid beam. Corey added a whittled peg beside it, his hands dusted with pine. The maker's space wasn't just a workshop, it was a family carved with those who valued her. Lila looked out at the space, saws humming, looms clicking, artisans laughing. Her family's shadow faded here. She was staining a new finish, and that was enough. A year after the underground auction, the Harper's Ferry maker's space glowed under an August mountain dawn, its pine rafters alive with the hum of saws and the scent of cedar shavings. Artisans shaped wood at workbenches, their hands steady, while looms clacked in a sunlit corner. Lila Hayes, 29, leaned against a lathe, her hands scarred from chisels at rest, her hazel eyes tracing the space's rhythm. Corey, her 16-year-old apprentice, now confident, taught kids to carve spoons. His toolbox open to a sketch of a bench, his voice clear. That morning, the town had gifted Lila a sign above the entrance. Lila Hayes, builder of bonds. Its walnut letters gleaming like river-worn stones. Lila's chest warmed not with pride, but with the quiet strength of a table's solid joinery. "I thought family was what you're born to." Her voiceover murmured, calm and sure. "Now I know it's what you carve." A young craftsperson, her apron dusted with sawdust, nodded toward Ruth's carving knife, hung on the workshop's pegboard wall. "What's that about, Ms. Lila?" she asked, her eyes curious. Lila's smile deepened, her fingers brushing the knife's etched handle. "It's about shaping your truth." she said. Her words a polished grain of hard-earned clarity. The craftsperson nodded, returning to her oak plank, as if the answer had taken root. A memory surfaced. Lila 15. Standing at table with Ruth under moonlight, their chuckles mingling with the Shenandoah's ripple, Ruth calling her, my carver. In the present, Lila's gaze held steady, anchored by that bond. Her phone pinged. An email from Vance. Sorry, Lila. Can we move on? The words were thin like veneer over rotten wood. She swiped it away, her fingers unhurried, and turned to Corey and Miss Clara, who wove a rug nearby, her silver braids catching the light. The space stretched before her, tables gleaming, saws singing, artisans swapping stories over carved bowls. Corey waved, his sketchbook close, while Miss Clara's nod was a steady brace. Lila no longer needed her family's approval. Diane and Roy's silence since the reunion. Vance's flimsy apology, they were scraps of a frame she'd outgrown. She wasn't broken. She was built. The river's whisper drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Lila stood rooted, the maker's space wrapping around her. The sign, the artisans, the wood, they were her legacy, shaped with those who saw her. I'm here, her voice oversighed, a note of triumph. And I'm whole.